This report on migration and global environmental change was commissioned by the UK government's Chief Scientific Advisor and was produced by the Foresight Department of the Government Office of Science. It's a report that looks at the relationship between migration and environmental change over a 50-year time span, and it picks up on concern that environmental change, particularly climate change, might lead to millions of people being forced to leave areas that are flooded or at risk of drought or prone to sea level rise and so on. And what the report looks at is what kind of relationships there are between migration and global environmental change. And it says that in a 50-year time span, climate change in particular is likely to have quite a strong impact on the drivers of migration, but in a way that is different to what has been understood until now. In particular, we point to the fact that migration is already occurring in the world, and whilst many people are likely to leave areas that are of environmental risk, many millions of people are also currently moving towards areas of environmental risk. So there has been massive movement, particularly in Asia, but also in Africa, towards low elevation coastal zones, cities and floodplains that are prone to environmental risks in the future. Also, many millions of people do not migrate, of course, and indeed are sometimes unable to do so. And one of the consequences of climate change is that it will be likely that poorer people in many parts of the world will be less able to migrate. So we highlight another group that we call trapped populations, people who are not moving because of climate change, but are likely to be trapped in places that are vulnerable to climate change. So essentially the report is saying that there are three populations of concern, not just people who are migrating away from environmental risks, but also people who are moving towards those risks, and people who are unable to move. Well, there are two important policy implications from this report that are worth highlighting. The first is to say that if we take seriously the idea that people are already moving towards areas of environmental risk, and many of those areas are large growing cities in developing countries that are vulnerable to sea level rise, to storms, to flooding, that suggests that the development community, the international development community in particular, should really pay more attention to cities. Cities in poor countries are often already failing their citizens in terms of the provision of water or adequate shelter. Migration to these cities intensifies those difficulties, but it's a migration that we're very unlikely to be able to stop. Urbanisation is a very strong and growing trend in the world, and development agencies, urban planners need to account for this migration rather than wishing it away. So that's one key policy conclusion. A second one is that not only is it difficult to stop migration, actually often migration can be part of the solution. Migration for many poor people in rural areas represents an important adaptation mechanism in the face of climate change or other environmental change. So it's by promoting these linkages between rural and urban areas that we can help build adaptation both in the cities and also back in the countryside.